Hey everyone, it's Jenna from Cruise Blog, and today I'm going to be sharing the 5 things I absolutely hated and the 4 things I liked about my cheap Costa Cruise. This is one of the world's worst rated cruise lines, and after my experience, I might never do it again. Let's jump in. Would you sail on a cruise ship with a 2.8 star rating out of 5? Recently, I did just that, and by the end of my week on board, I couldn't wait to disembark for good. While researching European cruises earlier this year, I came across a cheap 7-night cruise on Costa Toscana, which is one of the world's biggest cruise ships. The ship launched in 2021, so it was relatively new, and I booked the cruise on a whim for $1,090 as a solo traveler. Prior to booking, I kept an open mind about Costa Cruises. I wasn't going to let my cruise experience be ruined by the lasting reputation from the Costa Concordia disaster of 2012, or even by the ship's low rating on Cruise Critic's website. Yet by the end of my week on board Costa Toscana, I was, unfortunately, more than ready to disembark. Although there were certain aspects of the vacation I enjoyed, including the food quality and itinerary, the experience was tainted by poor organization and ship design. Here are 5 things I absolutely hated and 4 I loved about my cheap Costa cruise. First, I hated Costa Toscana's main buffet, and it was unnecessarily chaotic. On the first evening of my cruise, I was disturbed by the utter chaos of the ship's main buffet, La Sagra dei Sapori. It's normal for hundreds of passengers to be at a cruise ship buffet at one time, but Costa Cruises failed at managing the crowds well. The buffet was not self-service, and so for each respective station, you should expect a long line. It could be a 10-minute wait for popular stations like meat and fish. Frankly, I found this buffet system a little ridiculous on a cruise ship with 6,000 guests, and it was not the fault of the crew members or passengers, but just bad ship design. Thankfully, during breakfast and lunch, I found out that there was another buffet in one of the main dining rooms, and this was far less crowded. Unfortunately, the most crowded buffet was the only one open for dinner service, which made me less likely to want to eat there. However, something I loved was my easy embarkation process. Although I would say that the flexible embarkation system isn't perfect. Many European cruise lines, including MSC and Costa, offer the ability to embark or disembark in any port of call. This makes their cruises sellable to a wider range of guests, as a Spanish guest, for instance, could embark in Barcelona instead of flying to Genoa and vice versa. This also makes planning cruises easier, as you can, theoretically, start a cruise vacation on any particular day. Rome, specifically the Civitavecchia port, is not the primary embarkation port for Costa Cruises, and that's where I embarked. The cruise line's home port is in Savona, Italy, and it's where a majority of cruisers embark and disembark. Starting my cruise in one of the secondary ports meant that my embarkation process was simple. Only a fraction of guests were embarking in Civitavecchia, so I encountered few lines and an overall pleasant embarkation experience. Flexible embarkation has its cons, of course. Although my embarkation day was relaxing, having new guests embark on the ship each day means there's a sense of confusion each morning and afternoon. Hundreds of guests with suitcases can be seen wandering the ship in the morning, and traditional activities like the sail-away party might happen midway through your cruise. Regardless of these downsides, my embarkation process on Costa was seamless, and I was happy I didn't have to be in a herd of thousands of other guests embarking at the same time. However, another thing I hated was that the adults-only spaces were not enforced. Costa Toscana technically has 2 adults-only pool spaces, but you shouldn't actually expect these areas to be free of children. Halfway through my cruise, I decided to finally check out the adults-only solarium space on Costa Toscana's pool deck. To my surprise, I found kids swimming in the pool. When I walked by a few hours later, there were even more children at the pool. It appeared the adults-only areas were not enforced on the ship, but I don't necessarily blame my fellow passengers. The sign saying adults only is honestly so small that it is easy to miss, although I'm not really sure a bigger sign would have made a difference anyway. Costa Cruises caters to families with children, and there were kids virtually everywhere on board. In general, I'd say Italians tolerate children in adult-centered spaces more than American, so I understand why there may have been kids at the adults-only pool. Even so, those looking for an adult-focused getaway should probably steer clear of Costa. Next, I loved the Italian atmosphere on board, from the food to the itinerary and decor. Because Costa Cruises is an Italian cruise line, it's understandable that the onboard experience will be heavily catered to Italian tastes. If you board a Costa cruise expecting an American-centric experience, you're likely to be surprised. First off, the primary language spoken is Italian. English-speaking guests will not encounter language difficulties though, as crew members all speak English. The ship was designed in the theme of Italian cityscapes, with venues like Gelateria Amarillo designed to feel like an Italian piazza. Even the bars matched the ship's Italian atmosphere, such as the Aperol Spritz bar, which specialized in the famous Venetian aperitif. Of course, sailing on an Italian cruise line means you should expect more than just a few differences in terms of operations. Mealtimes, for instance, were much later than what many North Americans would be used to. The earliest dinner seating was at 6 p.m., but the buffet did not open until 7:30 p.m. for dinner. Personally, I felt 6 p.m. was a perfect dinner time for early seating in the dining room, but I thought the buffet could have expanded the dinner hours to cut down on crowds. Additionally, service was less hands-on than an American cruise line, which matched a European expectation of service. By default, guests should expect less chit-chat with crew members compared to a line like Royal Caribbean, although the staff was always friendly when I initiated a conversation. Next up, I hated the tolerance for smoking on board, and I wished that the rules were stricter. On the subject of cultural differences, one aspect of Costa Cruises I could not get over was the smoking tolerance. Having traveled extensively throughout Italy, I've become accustomed to a higher prevalence of smoking, but that doesn't mean that I enjoy it. Smoking is far more common in Italy compared to the United States, and with that comes a higher tolerance for cigarette smoke. Personally, I hate smelling and inhaling cigarette smoke, and this was a major con of cruising on Costa. While the ship does have designated smoking areas, there seemed to be far more cigarette smoke compared to any European cruise I've taken prior. To make matters worse, guests are permitted to smoke on their balconies on Costa, but thankfully I was fortunate that none of my balcony neighbors were smokers. One thing I loved were the specialty restaurants. A dining package is almost a necessity on the ship. After being overwhelmed at Costa Toscana's frenzied buffet, I decided to splurge on a 3-night dining package for my sailing. I spent 110 euros for the package, which entitled me to dine at 3 of the ship's specialty restaurants. I'm usually cruising on a strict budget, but I'm never opposed to spending money on specialty dining regardless of the ship. I find the atmosphere of specialty restaurants much more intimate than the main dining rooms, and the quality of food is typically several notches higher too. However, on Costa Toscana, I didn't just enjoy my meals at specialty restaurants, I loved them. The quality of ingredients at specialty restaurants was exceptional. Everything tasted like it could have come from a high-end restaurant on land. If I had to change one thing about specialty dining on Costa Toscana though, I would alter the dining package price. Unless one of your meals is at Archipelago, the ship's most exclusive restaurant, you're better off paying for each meal individually. I also thought the dining package rules could have been better explained, as I wasn't always sure what was and was not included in the package without asking. Something I hated on Costa Toscana was the seating at entertainment venues, which made it impossible to watch shows. I'm not quite sure what the cruise line was thinking when designing the theaters on Costa Toscana, if you could even call them theaters. Unfortunately, the venues had so many obstructed views that it was nearly impossible to watch a show without showing up hours ahead of time. The main entertainment space, named the Colosseo, is a 3-deck-high amphitheater that functionally works as the ship's main atrium. Shows in the Colosseo focus on acrobatics, circus tricks, and vocalists, and from what I could see, the shows were impressive. That being said, the Colosseo's design ruined the experience for me. There's only a small amount of seating with a full view of the stage, but these seats were often occupied hours before a show began, as passengers also used the seating as a hangout space in the atrium. Every other seat in the area gives an obstructed view. There are even television screens around the stage so passengers can watch the show on a screen instead. The alternative is to stand behind the non-obstructed seats, but this isn't exactly a comfortable option. Poltrona Frau Arena, the ship's other entertainment space, doubled as a nightclub and production venue. Like the Colosseo, it was not set up like a traditional theater, which unfortunately meant that seating options with adequate views were limited. And finally, the last thing I disliked was the lack of onboard programming. On port days, Costa Toscana only seemed to offer most programming after 7 p.m., which mostly consisted of live music, production shows, and karaoke. The itinerary's only sea day saw more activities available, such as the Zorb Challenge, during which participants ran through an obstacle course while stuck inside a giant inflatable ball. Even still, a majority of activities offered on sea days involved selling something, such as a free event to learn how to tie a sarong at the bikini store. I thoroughly enjoyed the activities I did attend, from live music to the midnight silent disco, and I only wished there was more available to do during the day. Overall, I'm not sure I would sail on Costa Cruises again after my first experience. I always try to look at the bright side when cruising, but I'm not sure I would sail on Costa Cruises again. While the ship was beautiful and I had nothing but positive interactions with crew members, it's hard to overlook major downsides like the lack of daytime programming and poor crowd management. A few small tweaks, such as expanding hours of the buffet dinner service and offering poolside bar service, could have enhanced the overall experience greatly. Even when comparing Costa Cruises and MSC Cruises, two of the major European lines, I preferred cruising on MSC by a long shot. I did find the food quality better on Costa Toscana compared to my MSC World Europa cruise last year, but MSC offers a greater variety of cuisines included in the cruise fare. Although I would consider sailing on the vessel again if a unique itinerary required it, I think I'll stick to other cruise lines for my next European cruise. Well, everyone, that's all for today. I hope you liked this video. Are you planning to sail on Costa Cruises anytime soon? If so, let me know in the comments below. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on those notifications so you are notified every time we post a new video. Until next time, happy cruising!